Hello and welcome to GED Live at PALS. Today we are going over a couple of GED science practice questions to help you preparing for your GED test. We will solve them together and I will try to explain the answers to you as good as I can. Before we get started, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. This will allow us to reach more people like you who want to prepare for their GED tests. All right, let's have a look at the first question. There is more vegetation present in areas with mild climates than in areas with harsh climates. Pollen analysis is one of the tools used to study past climates. The diagram in the left below shows information about sediments of the same age, sampled from different parts of the world. Which of these sediments most likely represents the area with the mildest climate? So, what did the text tell us about different types of climates related to amounts of pollen? There is more vegetation present in areas with mild climates. That means that more vegetation means more plants, and more plants probably means more pollen. So the correct answer here should be D. The more vegetation we have, the more pollen there is. The next question. A food chain is a way of showing food relationships among a group of organisms that share an environment. The illustration at the left represents a freshwater food chain. We have algae as the producers. Algae are eaten by small fish, which are eaten by large fish, which are eaten by humans. What is most likely to happen if the supply of large fish in a pond is reduced by extensive fishing? Humans will eat more algae, and the amount of algae will increase. The population of small fish will increase, small fish will get smaller. Large fish begin to eat algae. So we are taking away, or we are reducing the number of small fish. That means there is a lower predation pressure on small fish. So we are taking away large fish. There is going to be a lower predation pressure on small fish, which means that small fish can reproduce more and produce more offspring, and that should increase the number of small fish. The effect on the algae should be the opposite, because more small fish means more hungry small fish, which could have a negative impact on the population of algae. But the question is asking for, the question doesn't have anything about decreasing algae, it only mentions increasing algae. So answer C is the correct answer here. The population of small fish will increase. The pH of a liquid is a measure of its acidity or its alkalinity. Even small changes in pH of human blood can cause very serious health problems. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, is one of the dissolved gases present in healthy blood. Carbon dioxide normally mixes with the water and blood to form a mild acid, which is carbonic acid, and that lowers the blood pH. If a health problem causes the dissolved carbon dioxide to increase or decrease, the blood's pH would change and could produce an unhealthy pH level. Based on this information, which statement best summarizes the blood condition that might result when an individual has a respiratory condition that causes the blood to contain too much carbon dioxide? So what did we learn from the text? Let's have a look at the answers and see if we can find the correct one. The blood pH will remain the same. The blood pH will be lowered. The blood will be less acidic. The blood's white cell count will be greatly decreased. The blood will clot more quickly. So we can definitely exclude a few answers here, and these are E and D. There's nothing mentioned in the text about white blood cells and blood clotting. It might be correct, but We don't get any information about this, so the question is not asking for E or D. You can exclude them. There's no information about blood clotting or white blood cell count. So that leaves us with pH remains the same, pH lowers or will be less acidic. And if we look in the text, it says that dissolved carbon dioxide will form carbonic acid with the water in the blood. So if the carbon dioxide is too much in the blood, that means carbon dioxide increases. Increasing carbon dioxide means more carbonic acid is produced, which means it will lower the blood pH and it becomes more acidic. So the correct answer here is answer B. More carbon dioxide, more carbonic acid, more acidic, which means lower pH. Now the pH scale goes from 0 to 14, and anything below 7, so from 0 to 6 or from 6 to 0, is acidic. The lower the pH, the more acidic it is. 7 is neutral, and anything from 8 to 14 is alkaline, with 14 being very alkaline and 8, 9 only mildly. Osmosis is the movement of water across a selectively permeable membrane in order to equalize the concentration, the amount of protein per milliliter of water, on two sides of the membrane. Consider the diagram below. The container is divided into two compartments, A and B, by a selectively permeable membrane. Each circle represents 100 protein molecules that can't pass through the membrane. The amount of water on two sides of the membrane is initially, at the start, equal, the same. So we have the same amount of water on both sides, but a higher concentration of protein on the right, a lower concentration of protein on the left. Now, one circle represents 100 protein molecules. So we have quite a bit more on the right compared to the left. And again, what will happen? Osmosis is the movement of water across a selectively permeable membrane. So in the middle we have the membrane. Water can move across, proteins cannot, to equalize the concentration of solutes on two sides of the membrane. So the water wants to make the concentrations of proteins equal. To do that, in which direction does water have to move? Or protein? Can protein move? Well, let's have a look at the possible answers. It says protein will flow from B to A, protein will flow from A to B, water will flow from B to A, water will flow from A to B. Both water and protein will flow from compartment B to A. Now, so we can exclude very easily three answers here. The answers that we can exclude are A, B, and E, because it says protein moves across the membrane. But we learn from the text above that protein can't pass through the membrane. So it's either C or D. And water will try to equalize the concentrations, meaning we need more water in B to dilute the protein here. If there's more water in B, that means the proteins can spread out more, they have more space, it becomes more dilute, and the amount of water in A will decrease, so the concentration of protein will increase since they will get closer together. And that is osmosis, the movement of water from an area of high water potential to an area of low water potential across a partially permeable membrane. High water potential in A, low water potential in B. An island in the Adriatic Sea was overpopulated with snakes. Sailors who came to the island brought and let loose mongoose, animals that feed on snakes. The population of snakes started decreasing since the mongooses were eating them. The mongoose population started increasing since there was ample food around. The mongooses were not native to the island, and there was no predator on the island to keep the mongoose population in check. At some point, there were hardly any snakes left on the island, and people started populating it. The mongoose, facing a shortage of snakes, started eating chickens that people kept for their eggs and meat. However, people caught on and protected the chickens from getting eaten. The mongoose population decreased. Some remain on the island, but the number is now at equilibrium, kept in check by the availability of food. The passage illustrates what? The interdependence of organisms, the fragility of an ecosystem, the ability of humans to change an ecosystem, the relationship between the population of predator and prey, or all of the above. And the correct answer here is, what do you think? You can have a quick thought about the answer here. You can pause the video if you want to. We'll go over the answer now. The correct answer here is E. All of the above are correct statements which are illustrated by the text above. The interdependence of organisms is shown by the relationship between the mongoose and the snakes, and the mongoose and the chicken. Organisms depend on other organisms for a source of food, for example. The fragility of an ecosystem. That an ecosystem can be brought out of balance and eventually brought to a point where it collapses. The ecosystem probably didn't collapse here, but an important part of the ecosystem was disturbed. The ecosystem had a natural snake population, and an invasive species was brought to the island, the mongoose, which is not native to the ecosystem, to the islands, and it basically eradicated the snake populations there, bringing them to a very, very, very low point, which shows us that ecosystems can be fragile. Since the mongoose were brought by humans, humans initially caused the change in the ecosystem. And predator and prey relationship, the relationship between the mongoose and the snake, are represented here as well. So answer E is correct. We have a second question related to this paragraph. There were hardly any snakes left on the island because mongooses had eaten them, people had killed them, there was no predator for the mongooses, sailors brought them prey, the chickens didn't taste as good to the mongooses. Also, based on the text, the mongooses ate the snakes. Which statement best describes the change in the population of mongooses on the island? The population was 0 before the sailors brought a few. The few then multiplied, and the number of mongooses on the island is still steadily growing. The population was 0 before sailors brought a few. The few then multiplied, increasing a number of mongooses. When the snakes were almost gone, the mongooses population started to decrease. The population was small before sailors brought more mongooses, increasing the gene pool. The number of mongooses kept growing until the people started protecting the chickens. The population was small before the sailors brought more snakes, increasing the food supply for the mongooses. The number of mongooses kept growing until the snake population was almost gone. The mongooses died out since they ran out of food. Or E, the population was initially large, but when a predator was brought by sailors, the number of mongooses decreased. Okay, so again we can exclude a few answers here based on the first statement of the possible answers. E can be excluded. Here the population of mongooses and snakes are mixed up. It says the population was initially large. The snake population, not the mongoose population. But the question is about the population of mongooses on the island, not snakes. So E is wrong. E describes the snake population. What else can we exclude? We can exclude C and D. because C and D start with the sentence, or with part of the sentence, that the population was small before the sailors brought more mongooses. Okay, D even says more snakes, so not more snakes were brought, but C can be excluded since there were no mongooses before the sailors brought any. So there was no population of mongooses before the sailors brought mongooses. So it's either A or B. And the answer that makes most sense to me is B. It says the population was 0 before the sailors brought a few mongooses. Yes, there were no mongooses on the island, and then the sailors brought a few. The few mongooses then multiplied, and A says the number of mongooses on the island is still steadily growing, which is false. It says that the mongoose population decreased and some remained on the island, but the number is now at a balance and kept in check by the availability of food. So they don't have a lot of food available and the numbers are very low. So B makes more sense here. The population was 0 before the sailors brought a few. The few then multiplied, increasing in number, and until the snakes were almost gone and the mongoose population started decreasing. So B is the correct answer here. In humans, a pair of chromosomes, one from each parent, determines the sex of the baby. Females have 2 chromosomes while males have an X and a Y chromosome. The baby always gets an X chromosome from the mother, so in humans the father determines the sex of the baby by supplying it with either an X chromosome to make it a female or a Y chromosome to make it a male. In birds, like in humans, a pair of chromosomes determines the sex. Birds with 2 W chromosomes are male, birds with a W and a Z chromosome are female. Which statement is true about birds? The male bird determines the sex of the offspring by supplying it with a W or a Z chromosome. The male bird determines the sex of the offspring by supplying it with one of its W chromosomes. The male bird determines the sex of the offspring by supplying it with X or Y. We can exclude C. It's not about X or Y in birds. This is about humans. So we can exclude D as well. It's not about X or Y chromosome in birds. And E says the female bird determines the sex of the offspring by supplying it with the W or the Z chromosome. So it's similar to humans in birds, but the big difference is that the males have 2 W chromosomes. In humans it's X and Y, so different. And the females in birds have W and Z, whereas in humans the females have X and X. So here it's swapped around, and that is the reason why in birds the female bird will determine the sex of the offspring, since she has the 2 different chromosomes, and it's a 50-50 chance whether an offspring will receive either a W or a Z chromosome from the mother. A father will always contribute a W chromosome. So the correct answer here is E. Hypertension or high blood pressure is a condition that can lead to heart attack and stroke. A scientist graphed the following data collected from a study of hypertension. What is a logical conclusion based on the data? So we see all ages, 30%, have hypertension. That's a large number. And then we see the different age groups where we can see 18 to 24-year-olds under 10% and rising, and 65 to 74-year-olds above 60%. The prevalence of hypertension is higher than average in the 35 to 44-year age group. The prevalence of hypertension is higher than 45 to 54 age group. Highest in 45 to 54. The prevalence of hypertension increases with age. No teenagers suffer from hypertension. All senior citizens suffer from hypertension. That shouldn't be too difficult. Let's quickly have a look at E. All senior citizens, not all of them. It's about above 60%, but not all of them. No teenagers. We see 18 to 24. 18 is still a teenager, so teenagers do suffer from hypertension as well, or may suffer. 35 to 44, higher than average. 35 to 44, here's the average, is below average. And the prevalence of hypertension highest in 45 to 54, nope, it's in the middle somewhere, just above the average. So that means that the prevalence of hypertension increases with age, and that is definitely true. And we can see for each age group, the percentage of people who suffer from hypertension increases. So the correct answer here is C. Many years ago, beavers were introduced to a region of California that they had not previously inhabited. 40 years later, the beaver population had grown so much that a cluster of aspen trees used by the beavers for food and building materials inside the national forest became endangered. The beavers were also interfering with the water systems. In retrospect, how would biologists most likely evaluate the impact of the introduction of the beaver? A. An important tool for controlling the aspen population. A disruption to the forest ecosystem. A model program for other animals. A very successful from an ecological viewpoint, having no significant effect on the forest ecosystem. So there is one important, the correct answer here is B, a disruption of the forest ecosystem. Since the beavers used a cluster of aspen trees for food and building materials, which led the aspen trees to become endangered in this part of the park. So this was a disruption to the ecosystem. Plus the beavers were introduced to the region, so they were before not there. All right. That's it. These are all the questions we go over today. I hope you enjoyed this screencast and I could help you in understanding a little bit more on how to approach GED exam questions. I hope you learned something new today. If you liked this video and if it helped you, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. This will allow us to reach more people like you that prepare for their GED exams. I wish you all the best in the future, and I hope you pass your test, your GED exam, and earn your credentials. And I see you next time, eventually, for more GED science questions. Have a good day.